Hello and welcome to the Chess Bit, the live stream where two guys talk about the World Chess Championship. I'm John Mackenzie and I'm joined, as always, by my good friend Phil Makepeace.
You certainly are. Good evening, John. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I'm midway through a Leeds game where we're looking less than impressive, so it was nice to have a chance to run away and miss what was going on the pitch. But
this is just your life, isn't it? You got chess in the half time of the football.
Yeah. But the chess was. Yeah, it did take a little bit of a backseat for me because I've been watching a couple of games today as well. But the chess itself was a rip-roaring draw today, I think is the best way of describing it. Certainly by the end of it, my brain was fried. It felt as though there was a lot of things going on that I thought were not good or bad for certain players, and it ended up not being the case. I think we all had a lesson in not following match engines as you're going live. And fortunately for me, I've been following the Svidler live stream, so they make a point of not having the engines on, and I think that definitely makes a difference. But before we get into the ins and outs of the game, Phil, what was your sort of broad strokes take on that game?
So the way I've done it today, because it's a Saturday, we have life. I watched the opening. I watched the opening 15, 16 moves and then went out. And then I have since done my best to kind of resurrect the emotions that may have been happening during the game. Because as you say, it was a complete roller coaster. There were lots of moments and lots of dynamism in this game that there wasn't necessarily yesterday. Where yesterday, we had a pawn sacrifice, but that was about it. The remaining pieces were roughly the same. Today we had, a really interesting exchange sacrifice by Magnus, where he, can we say he justified it?
Well, he got a draw in the end, I suppose, so he didn't unjustify it.
No, that's true. Is that a word? Can you unjustify something?
yeah, maybe not.
I don't know, but the thing of him clearly, going for it. We had the classic good knight against bad bishop position where Nepo just had no open files to use his rooks. So the very standard kind of exchange sacrifice trope. I mean, my initial instinct going through it didn't necessarily match the commentary I'd been seeing, where it looked like they were going, oh, he's not got enough. Nepo's on top here. That wasn't my impression just looking through the game. Maybe he had some time pressure as well, didn't he? Which I guess added to it. But it just seemed kind of quite normal. Maybe I'm just wrong. It didn't seem like there was much there, actually. It was exciting from a... Again, E5 hadn't really been played. And it was interesting what Caruana said about this. You may choose, and I think a lot of our conversation over this match is going to be about the opening and about opening prep in general. I said that he'd be more willing to choose a slightly inferior line that's never been trodden and beaten it than line where you might, because your opponent is perhaps more likely to have something. So did he though? It didn't feel as double-edged as perhaps thoughts.
I don't know if anyone else is getting this, but I'm getting quite a bit of lag from you, Phil. So you dropped in and out. Maybe someone in the chat could let us know whether or not it's me who's lagging out or whether or not it's Phil.
Hopefully.
Thank you to people who are in the chat. We've had a hello from Jonathan Bryant, who says hello, sort of, and Duncan as well. Friend of the podcast, Duncan, getting in touch too. Do get in touch if you're in the chat and have questions for us. Johnny does have a question. He's not called Johnny Bryant, is he? But I always call him Johnny Bryant, so Johnny Bryant he is.
He hates being called Johnny.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, they're both getting some lag. I'm just interested whether or not that lag is coming through your stream or my stream, but no doubt someone can let us know. let's step back and go to the opening then. So we had a Catalan opening. Do you want to just talk us through the broad strokes of that opening? What the players are trying to do with that kind of opening, and where the deviations came from in that opening that you might not have expected?
The Catalan is basically, it was what Kramnik used for years to just win with white. He would play one knight f3, possibly d4, often g3, and then just use his light squared bishop on g2 to win. That was what he did for years and years and years. And the lines where, as we saw today, where there's a capture on c4 and it's a bit more fun, shall we say, have been thought to be black's best try. And the opening itself today, we had a line where Nepo played this move 8b5. I think it's 8. Let's double check. I think it was 8. And this meant that 7b5, I beg your pardon, it was 8 knight e5 that was the novelty from Carlsen that put him at this supposed disadvantage, where he's actually, the irony there is that he's using this bishop on g2 to do more stuff, but perhaps losing some development at the same time because that knight has moved for a second time. This is not necessarily the best thing to do in the opening, and this is the point. What then happened is you get all of these pieces. It kind of reminded me of a Christmas tree. You've got all these pieces just on the light squares and not much happening on the dark squares in between. And so it's got this kind of chaos on the light squares, that everything happening there. It just creates this very big imbalance play, which you're going to get if you have any kind of doubled pawns, as Nepo had. Anytime there's doubled pawns, that automatically means there's an open file somewhere. In this case, it was the D file, and that's what Carlsen tried to use by plonking a knight on D6 later on and then backing it up with a rook. So this is the kind of stuff that you get in these lines where the pawn is captured. Again, I'm still coming at this from the point of view: was it actually that thrilling? It just seemed like quite a normal game. Not much seemed to happen after the exchange sacrifice happened. But yeah, it certainly means that we probably will get another Catalan, because it seemed to go. I think both players can be reasonably happy with how they dealt with certainly the opening and the early middle game. I don't think that's going to have changed much there.
Yeah, I think, speaking as someone who's a little bit more of an ingenue when it comes to chess, it did feel like quite an exciting game, because it did feel as though the game maybe swung backwards and forwards a little bit. Felt as though Nepo sort of turned the screw a little bit on Magnus for a bit, and then Magnus sort of swapped a bit of material and sort of leveled things out, and it felt as though maybe Magnus was starting to sort of wind up on his own side, and then Nepo obviously sort of played his way out, and then it obviously just petered out into a draw. The other thing I suppose that we should talk about is, as I've already mentioned, like watching the games now with chess engines is interesting, because I think what we're seeing in this match is we're seeing Magnus both times offering up a pawn sacrifice early on, and also and I think it was an interesting line from I can't remember if it was Caruana or Giri. One of the two of them was talking about how I think it was Caruana who was saying that when you're going through your opening prep, you actually like lines that look slightly worse for you, because the automatic thing that you do when you're preparing is that you look for the strongest lines, and then you just assume that your opponent will know those lines inside out. So if you can start taking them out of their book by going down these sort of maybe minor lines, which obviously you potentially aren't getting quite so good a position out of it or in the long run, but actually you've got the advantage of maybe knowing those lines better than they do, and so getting compensation back in that way. So what's your general take on that? I mean, how much of what we're seeing here is people sort of responding to the engine saying, oh look, Nepo is almost like a pawn up in black according to the engines for a long stretch of these games. Are people just taking too much notice of the engines? Are the engines only useful in prep, and are they not really that useful a heuristic tool when you're going through the games themselves?
This has been happening for years, and I absolutely hate it where you can't, or the default certainly is to show the engine evaluation on these various platforms. I think it should be a thing where there should be a button to click it on rather than the button to click it off. I mean, yeah, I was saying earlier that this Caruana quote, yeah, it's very interesting, and it gives you a real insight into the 2018 match as well. Placed, I mean, yeah, obviously Anand and Karyakin and whomever else who've played these matches before out it, but Caruana played his World Championship match against Carlsen in an era where engines are pros, but to the amateurs as well. And now any human. This certainly wasn't the case necessarily 10 years ago. Is there an over-reliance from... Yes. Does it matter? If you choose not to have this on the site and you're making these comments and you're getting what you get from the match, but I think that the way that we consume chess at the moment is inevitably going to be much more driven by engines, and it's a shame because we like to be able to chat about these things, and it's nice that Carlsen and Nepo, as you say, are going down these slightly more dubious lines where they'll have gone, yeah, even though maybe the initial engine evaluation will say like minus 0.8 or something, but they'll have known that it's going to maybe come out better 12 moves down the line. So I think the engines are obviously useful, but there's certainly an element where we shouldn't just assume that initial evaluation is going to be absolutely accurate, because these players will have seen further naturally through their prep.
Yeah, and I think it's just about getting the balance right between what engines are functional and useful for, and then not just sort of relying on them for something that they've not been designed for, nor are they useful for.
Would you like to ask me the same question as yesterday? Because remember, I gave a hint, an answer that was contingent on today's play about whether Nepo had been happiest.
Yeah. Well, we've got a question from Duncan here, which I think touches on this. So he says, today it felt like both players missed opportunities, but is it harsh to think that Nepo is playing well, but Magnus is slightly under par? Is that just something that's narratival based because we think that Magnus is the best in the world, therefore if they're sort of matching off draw for draw, Magnus is underperforming and Nepo isn't?
Why can't Nepo be overperforming?
Yeah.
That would be my argument. I don't think we know yet. Magnus clearly isn't at his best, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's being outmatched. I think it's too early to say. It's a cop out. I know. Sorry, boys, but it's still way too early to know. Magnus, we've had a couple of games where Magnus has just given away a pawn and justified it in some respect, but maybe objectively hasn't played the best. Nepo as well yesterday. We haven't had any clear mistakes, I don't think.
We've had one game with each of them playing white, right? So it's not enough to really judge how well they're playing, I suppose. Hello to
Nepo's
Benji.
Nepo must be happiest so far. He must be.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're a challenger and you're making your first appearance, you just want to get into the game and get the first two games out of the way without being down, right? And he's done that, and that's, I mean, yeah, obviously it'd be great if you're a game up, but like at this point you don't care. You just want to be, you would take like being all square, having played black and white, and that's that.
He's got a 12 game match now.
Yeah.
We're back to where we were at the beginning of 2018. Just a 12-game match.
Mm-hmm. Hello to Benji in the chat. Nice to see him along. And again, guys, sorry, the internet at Phil's end is dropping a little bit, but I think it's sort of resolved itself a bit.
Sorry.
It's all right. In terms of what you wanted to, you said you wanted me to ask that same question that you asked yesterday. Do you want to just remind the listeners what that is, and me, because I've completely forgotten what it is?
It was just, I think I just answered it. It was just about who'd be happiest after game one, and I just don't think we could really answer that while they'd only played one game. Now we've seen them both with each colour. I think that we can make better judgments on that. Certainly, Magnus is, his openings clearly, he's doing his best to make things, as I said, I used that word dynamic earlier. I think that's the main thing here that we've got with what's happened so far. But Nepo has clearly risen to the challenge, and what we may well see going forward is, I am completely confident that Magnus has more surprises up his sleeve yet, and Nepo may well have one or two as well. But what we may well see in the next 3 to 4 games is Magnus calming down a bit on that front, playing more solid stuff, playing more well-trodden paths, and as we had, I think we had a question earlier on our Twitter about this, about how, when is Magnus going to start trying to outplay Nepo by being Magnus rather than being a well-prepped human being? That hasn't happened yet. He hasn't really got there. I mean, he saw a little bit of it yesterday, I suppose, but I feel like a lot of that was prep as well. So,
well, JB's question fits in quite nicely here. So JB asked, Svidler, Anand, and Caruana were all insisting A4 was going to be played before 8 NE5 appeared on the board. A5 wasn't expected yesterday night. A5 wasn't expected yesterday. Does this mean Carlsen has the initiative in the match? And this is what you're starting to touch on now. Are we seeing Carlsen maybe tentatively seeing if he can break Nepo early on, and then he is going to do what you're suggesting, which is slip back into maybe a little bit more solid playing from here on in, and see if he can just force openings through playing solid chess? Or do you think we'll carry on seeing it?
I think, I'll refer to what I said earlier. I think that we'll get something later on, but you may just see this pattern, just everything just kind of calming down a little bit with the opening surprises, and then we'll get more fun stuff in the second half of the match where and has to win. The main thing with this match, I think, is what we preview episode, that Carlsen cannot rely as heavily on rapid play and blitz against Nepo as he could against Caruana. And so, there's going to be more games like today's in the second. Oh, sure, we'll get this going. I'm not so sure we'll get this kind of stuff happening in games 4 or 6, which is Carlsen's next whites.
Well, your internet is lagging out a little bit again. I think we've discovered that 6:15 is probably not the best time on a Saturday to stream, but we won't have to do that very often. But let's close things up here just to save the listeners losing you out. But what's your expectations just finally for the game tomorrow? Do you have any expectations, or is it just going to be the same old? What did we see from? We saw a Spanish opening, didn't we, in game one? Are we going to see a Spanish again, and a sort of similar thematic line, or with tweaks, or do you think that we'll see something completely different?
I think we'll get another Spanish. We might get a Berlin instead, or A6 this time maybe. But yeah, I think that yesterday didn't really tell us that much, actually, apart from the opening stuff. I think, another Spanish seems pretty likely.
Well, we will be back tomorrow in some form of iteration. I'm not sure who's on tomorrow, but we will be back covering the game. If you want this in audio, then you can re-listen on in podcast form. So do check that out as well. But yeah, we'll be back and we'll be around and we'll be making comments about the games as they go. But thank you all for listening in, and thank you, Phil, for joining me tonight.
My pleasure.